Just a gentle note before we begin. Today's episode includes discussion of dementia, chronic stress, caregiver burnout, and grief. Please listen in a way that feels supportive for you. You're welcome to pause and come back at any time. Caregiving is rarely one clean job. It's sleep deprivation and medical admin. It's being the calm one in the room and then crashing in the car afterwards. It's sibling dynamics, marriage strain, the quiet guilt of not doing enough, and the very real love that keeps us showing up anyway. And here's what caregivers are almost never told. If you feel like you're not coping, it may not be a mindset problem. It may be a body problem, a nervous system or physiology problem. Today's guest is here to bring relief, clarity and practical tools without shame, without hype, and without pretending any of this is easy. Dr. Golnosh Sharafsaleh, also known as Dr. G, is a board-certified geriatrician and lifestyle medicine physician who works with people living with dementia and complex chronic illness, and she also cares for the carers navigating that terrain. She's developing a structured lecture series on what caregiving actually looks like in real life, the biology of chronic stress, how caregiver reserve erodes over time, and how resilience can be rebuilt intentionally. She's also the author of a memoir, Life, Love, and the In-Between, sharing stories of patients and caregivers and the meaning that can emerge in fragile seasons. Dr. G, welcome to Radiant Moments.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It is a pleasure to be here.
Dr. G, before we dive in, I'd love to ground our listeners in who you are and why this work matters to you. Was there a moment in your clinical work or your personal life that changed how you understand aging and caregiving and led you to create this pathway of supporting caregivers with practical, evidence-based tools?
Michelle, the first time I started my journey as a caregiver was when I was 16 years old. I helped my mother take care of my grandfather who had dementia and some other chronic medical problems. And there was a lot of meaning through that. But I also saw how my mother had to deal with the challenges of being a caregiver to her father and at the same time raise her children and have all of the responsibilities that an adult has. And what I realized at that time was I always wanted to be a physician, but if I wanted to truly help, I needed to go into a space where I was helping those who are most vulnerable. And we never talk about this. Our patients, our elderly patients, our disabled patients, and then their caregivers. Kind of started the journey, and my journey sort of continued through medical school and through residency. Then I wasn't really an intimate caregiver for a while because everything settled down until we had our son in 2016. He had a congenital heart defect, and caring for him through the hospice experience and ensuring that his personal needs were met, that really enlightened my view of what caregiving is like. And then now caregiving has sort of transitioned as we have a child that has some special needs. And then also I'm now starting to support my parents. So in essence, this is a part of what I do, and geriatrics, taking care of elders, is so powerful because when I have patients, I'm caring for them and I'm also caring for their loved ones, because if their caregiver is not safe, if the caregiver is not healthy, then the patient is not safe and healthy. So my time is spent probably equally with both my patient and their caregivers.
And I think that's really beautiful to hear, because a lot of experience in medical industries is feeling judged or criticized for the role of being a caregiver and not being considered as part of the plan in that journey when we are supporting another person, that our lived experience on a day-to-day basis is not viewed as equal in the space when we're coming in to provide information, especially for our vulnerable loved ones who are elderly or can't speak for themselves with disability, non-verbal. And so your expertise as the lived experience person needs to be part of the considerations in that space. And I'm really excited to hear how you're looking after both the patient and the caregiver, and you view that as a 50-50 split, because if the caregiver falls, there's not somebody there to keep them safe and keep them going. Dr. G, you said something that really landed, that caregiving is never theoretical in your work. When you say caregiving is never theoretical, what does it look like in real life in your clinic? The patterns that you see again and again.
The biggest population that I work with now are individuals who have Alzheimer's type dementia or other dementias, and they're caregivers. These caregivers are generally a life partner or spouse, and sometimes adult children. Occasionally, they could be someone else, but the caregiving tends to be so intimate and it is so individual for everyone. And so, addressing each caregiver's unique needs has to be something that we think about on an ongoing basis. So it's not like every caregiver provides this level of care, or they do that, or they do this. It's what does this caregiver do specifically to this patient? Because let's say, what if my patient has swallowing issues? The caregiver needs different support systems for that. What if my patient is wandering? The caregiver needs specific support systems for that. What if the caregiver has a difficult time navigating the healthcare system? That is the support system that they need. So you can't just say, oh, this is caregiving. There are so many minute pieces and parts to this process that as a physician, I have to be attuned to that and I have to be aware of that. Because if I'm not, then I'm not just failing my patient, I'm failing the caregiver, which then is my patient.
And I'm hearing that what you're witnessing and the variations is that there is 100 different essential invisible load elements to caregiving. And they're so unique in their appearance, depending on what level the patient is at that they're caring for, the physical or emotional, if they have to use machinery to help with breathing, with gastroenterology, feeding, with urology. There are so many complex elements that go into that, plus medication management. And as a caregiver myself, from listening to your description, I feel seen, and I'm not working with you, but hearing that you understand that not one caregiver is the same as the next care, and we all need different elements as part of that care plan, and not feeling seen by our medical industry when we are in this role is really challenging. It's frustrating at times, it's overwhelming and can be debilitating, especially if you feel like you're hitting a brick wall all the time. They're not seeing this constant on mode that we are needing to have, especially if there's high needs involved. And I'd like to ask, for the caregivers listening who feel like their life has become paperwork, monitoring, and worrying, what would you say to them from the medical side and the human side?
I would let them know that there are support structures in place, and maybe they haven't found them yet, and that their life, their mind, their space is just as important as the person that they're caring for. I would tell caregivers that they are right now in this fight flight mode, not recognizing what they need to do. They may be so burned out, very little capacity and reserve, but reaching out and seeking support is essential. And sometimes even having a caregiver group that you come with, that you join is very helpful when you can hear other stories and that you're not in it by yourself. And that seems to help. In my practice, we have a caregiver support group that we recently started. It's in the evenings, and our caregivers find that group to be very useful because they're able to talk to each other during that group conversation. Sometimes it's not necessarily about the provider who's there delegating. It's really those individuals meeting each other and recognizing that they have this shared pain, shared love, shared joy. There's so much to caregiving. And sometimes rather than feeling completely burned out and lost, they may kind of find a place where they're found again, and it may motivate them. So I would say not giving up is important.
And I'd say that from a space where we have created a caregiver support space as well, it's very interesting to see how once a caregiver feels safe in a space and they know that they're not going to be judged for the hard thoughts that they have, or when they're feeling overwhelmed or burnt out, or they're just not got anything left, that sigh of relief to be able to share it and have it understood, period. There's no like, why haven't you done this? And have you tried that? And it's just, we hear you. It's hard. We get it. And that in itself is supportive. And when working with caregivers, what's one thing you see caregivers doing that looks like strength on the outside, but it's actually a sign that they're running on fumes?
I think my caregivers, the ones I take care of, they're often like running. I have this, I need to do this, I need to get that done, I need to be here. They're missing on sleep, they're missing out on self-care. And that moment, sometimes the adrenaline is kicking in and you are in this fight flight mode, and you have to feel like you are the only support system. You cannot abandon your role. All of that eventually can become overwhelming. And then the caregiver can crash. And then you've probably discussed this in your podcast episodes, but the Alzheimer's Association have a statistic, like 40% of caregivers can die first before the person that they are caring for. And there's a 63% increased risk of mortality on a big study that looked at caregivers in between the age of 66 to 96 years old. And then caregivers forget to go to the doctor and they forget to take care of their own medical needs. And one of the things I ask the caregivers, well, what matters to you? And a lot of times they tell me it's the person that they're caring for. That is the biggest thing that matters to them. And then I ask them, well, tell me about your mindset. What's going on there? And sometimes even just asking them about where their mindset is, they are like in tears. Like, no one asks me this. No one is asking me how I'm actually feeling. And I asked them, what medical problems do you have that we might need to think about? Because I have caregivers who have cancer and they're trying to navigate that with being a caregiver to someone who has dementia, who is wandering, who has other behavioral problems, who is not eating, who's not drinking, who has to see so many physicians. And then they sort of take a back seat. But if we don't take care of their personal needs, then what happens? So once I know about their medical problems and their medications, and I'm thinking about their mobility, their independence, and we try to place support systems for them so that they can thrive, they're not feeling the burden. And the guilt comes into play when I ask them, well, I should be awake all night with my spouse. Even they're awake, they're not going to sleep. For instance, one of my patients, it took a while for us to get some help in the home and have someone there just 3 nights a week so this partner could sleep. And I recently spoke to them and they said, oh, I feel so well rested. Just 3 nights a week of sleeping. My gosh, that's all it took to give you some of peace back and some sense of yourself back. And the other thing I do with caregivers is I do check in with them outside of the medical setting. I will call them or text them on weekends or in the evenings just to check in. How are you doing? So they know they're not alone. And that I find is important too, leaning in to support caregivers, not just asking them how they are, but how can you actually support them? And not saying, well, let me know if you need anything. That's not going to help a caregiver, but actually telling a caregiver what you're going to do for them. So those are the ways that I support my patients and their caregivers.
I really love how you're naming what so many of us live day to day, and that you're not alone and you can be regulating with the right care plan in place. And it's such a breath of fresh air to hear a medical practitioner who is actively seeking out the care and support of a caregiver so that their patients can be cared for at the highest level. And I think most medical professionals miss that step. Currently, in most of my life experiences, you have to have this balance between being assertive but not to be seen as aggressive so that you're not difficult, to not be too happy because then how can you possibly be depleted or exhausted, to not be too informed so that you have more information than the medical professional that you're seeing, to not be providing information that they view as you overstepping your boundary as a caregiver because that's your role. And there's all of these levels of judgment. And so to hear you come from a completely different, compassionate space is just so heartwarming. And I wish other medical professionals could see and understand the value and the knock-on effect of having this be a part of a care plan, no matter whether it is for disability, young children who are on a medical journey, elderly, and anyone in between. And I think that's really important because when burnout hits, it's like a brick wall gets put up and there is no moving past that until you have recovered. And I really felt when you said that whilst it took time to establish the right plan for having someone in home so that the caregiver could have 3 nights of sleep, because most caregivers can operate for quite some time on little to no sleep. But there is a point where we go, you look at you the wrong way and you burst into tears because you're just exhausted and you have like that brain fog that comes in and you're like, what's that thing over there? I know the name of it and it's a tea towel, but it takes you, time to find the word that you're looking for, because that's one of the white flags that's saying, hey, you need to take a break. We need you to have a moment, please, because we're getting to a point where you're going to fall over right now. And I want to go right into the heart of what you said about chronic caregiver stress is physiologic. So our body, it's not a character flaw. It's something that we feel physically. So can you explain in plain language what chronic stress does to the body over time and what's happening under the hood for caregivers?
Absolutely. So when I say we go into this fight-flight stage, we can run from a tiger, but we can't do it forever. And with caregiving, it's like doing it forever. And so our cortisol levels go up. And when we have elevated cortisol levels, we can develop something we call cortisol resistance, just like a diabetic who develops insulin resistance. And so inflammatory processes take place. And if we have high blood pressure, it may be higher. If we have autoimmune disease, it might hit harder and we may get sick. And if it's flu season, we may get hit harder with the flu. Cognitive issues, like you were talking about. Recently, I told somebody, I said, no, you do not have dementia. You are caregiving and you are burned out. This is why you're forgetting things. It's the caregiving dementia that you have, not true dementia. And they felt very reassured when I said that. This is all caregiving. But even on our DNA, on a cellular level, there are changes. And so caregivers are at higher risk for cardiovascular disease, for stroke, metabolic disorders. There is no time for us we have this cortisol burst, and in the normal world, we tend to come down and we get to rest. But when we're caregiving, we go through our reserve, we have no buffer, and then we erode away. We literally erode away. So that's what caregiving is like. And I think people aren't aware of that until they're in it. And people on the outside don't really see how it's impacting the caregiver. It's tough. It's hard to be a caregiver. I think even acknowledging that, letting caregivers know, I recognize that you are dealing with so much, that is so meaningful. But let's make sure we get a hold of this, because you are literally going to die from this caregiving role unless you take care of yourself.
Really like how you're putting words to what's happening, that it's eroding over time. It's not something that happens in an instant. It's something that continues to occur because most caregiving roles are not short-term, they're long-haul investments. And what are some of the early warning signs that the reserve is running low, especially the ones caregivers tend to dismiss or normalize?
If you develop a simple respiratory infection and it doesn't seem to resolve, it just sort of lingers, the cough lingers, the weakness lingers. You're so sleep deprived that you start forgetting things. You can't adhere to your schedule that you need to adhere to. You're not eating, you're losing weight, you're not sleeping. So those are some signs that, okay, something may be wrong and I need to take care of myself. I think the journey should begin with sort of gaining perspective. Like, what is my role here? What am I doing? And what am I hoping to achieve? So having that perspective can help us shift in the right direction, and recognizing what are my obstacles and what are the things that I need in order to be a better caregiver. Sometimes we fall into caregiving. We always fall into caregiving. We don't necessarily anticipate that this is going to be happening without preparation. And I think recognizing that will really help us in the front of the game, so that, like you said, it's not like an immediate thing. This goes on and on. The investment can be a long time. And if we try to understand, okay, I am now entering my role as a caregiver, and what is that going to look like? I wish we had more providers or medical systems that really focused on the caregiver. And maybe because so many people are now having dementia, and even so many people from your perspective, where children did not survive. Medicine is expanded so much. Our kids are living, and our caregiver roles again are integrating into our children's, like teenage years, into adulthood, where we're still going to be their caregivers. And I hope the medical system starts to really see that we care for the patient, we care for the caregiver. That has to be, again, a 50-50.
And I think because caregivers take on the responsibility even when it's not expected, they step up to the plate and they are maybe not equipped for that. They've never witnessed somebody else being a caregiver. Maybe they're a parent and when their baby was born, they were not anticipating that there were going to be any health needs or that there were going to be any impacts. They were planning for that they could drive, that they would get married, that they would be able to go to a normal school. And maybe that doesn't look like that now. And it's sudden and not anticipated, and there is no handbook provided to any caregiver when they start this journey. And it is also very rare to find a doctor, medical team who are willing, one, to integrate to make the process easier, two, to communicate so that nothing is overlooked. They're all making sure that there's no contraindications, that medications are not going to interact badly. And that is not really our reality without a massive input from the caregiver with trying to get teams to communicate, organizing multidisciplinary meetings, which is a massive undertaking. And I feel like a lot of caregivers, and I have been guilty of this myself, blame themselves that they're not resilient enough. The statement that you decided to have a child, so you should have expected this, or you have parents, so suck it up. You knew that they were going to get old one day. And I don't think there's that compassion for people who have never experienced this journey. And I feel in those moments, am I being too sensitive? Do I just need to suck this up and keep plowing on ahead? And so that is something that resonates with a lot of caregivers, that they blame themselves that I'm not resilient enough, I don't have enough energy. Why is this appearing so challenging? How would you reframe that in a way that removes shame but still empowers them to make even small changes to the positive?
I always tell people, you may feel guilt. You will feel guilt. And there's this like cognitive dissonance. You love the person that you care for and you hate their disease or you hate the situation. And then because of that, you almost like hate your role as the caregiver, but then you want to be there for that person. All these like confusing feelings and emotions. And often, like you said, you got to do this, suck it up. And I remind my caregivers that this is real work. People are paid caregivers, and most of our caregivers are the loved ones that are not paid, and they are navigating their own life in addition to helping the individual that they are caring for. So I say, I'm like, you may feel guilty, you may feel angry, you may feel lost, you may feel fatigued. All of these are normal feelings and emotions, and you should sit in that space. Like, why do I feel angry? Why do I feel guilty? And I like to talk to them and ask them about those things, because then I do tend to try to pull them out of that. Not necessarily that it goes away, but helping them recognize that these are normal feelings and emotions that a caregiver can have. And it's okay to sit in that space and allow yourself to have that moment, as long as it doesn't eat at you. Like I said, cause this erosion of your humanity. Caregiving is hard. I say it again.
And I think also that when we're in that space where we feel anger, where we feel resentment, where we may feel depleted or at our end of our tether, if we were not in a caregiving role, we wouldn't be as harsh on ourselves as we are because we're caring for somebody else. And I think the shame and the guilt and the disappointment in ourselves comes from partly because society expects that you are caring for someone, so you need to be at that higher level. And these emotions generally shouldn't be experienced by you. If you're doing this out of love, you shouldn't feel resentful that you can't work, or you shouldn't feel resentful that you can't follow the dream at this moment. And if you could name one core misunderstanding caregivers have about stress, what would it be?
I think caregivers feel guilty when they feel stressed out. I think caregivers feel as though they need to just, again, like you said, suck it up and not have the stress that they need to have, because their job is to do X, Y, Z. And their job is to get up in the morning and push through, even if their joints ache, even if they have a fever, even if they have a doctor's appointment. Oh, maybe miss it because today I need to do this for my loved one. This unexpected thing happened. And all of this adds up, and telling a caregiver that no, you need to take the time for yourself. And this is a job. It's not just something that you're meant to do out of love. None of us were meant to completely sacrifice and give ourselves to this one purpose. And caregivers do that. Caregivers embrace this. And then in doing so, they have these feelings, which are normal feelings to have. But again, recognize that you have to take the time for yourself. Like, where does this come from? And also, okay, if they're not caregiving, who is? Who else is going to step up? So if you're feeling this guilty about maybe not doing the right thing, or feeling guilty that you're angry, or feeling guilty that you're not getting everything right, then who could actually come in that space and do this job better than you can? Nobody can. And I think that's empowering too. I tell my caregivers, you're doing a better job than a paid individual would. Sometimes I have the one adult child who's caring for the loved one. They're like, I don't have any other support from my siblings. And I tell them, I said, do you think they could do this job? Like, think of how strong you are, how resilient you are, that you are in this space and you're continuing to do this. And yes, you're going to have these emotions up and down every day. It's okay to have them, but let's focus on helping you with the challenges that you're having, and then peeling apart some of those challenges and trying to provide support in those areas will relieve the caregiver of some of their stress.
And I think when we look at caregiving as a whole, and you think about how often that you're constantly scanning for if you need to do something different, if you're starting to see that there's a decline, what can we do that's proactive in order to prevent us having to have a trip to the hospital? What do we need to do to help our loved ones feel empowered in that moment? You're constantly thinking of how to make their situation better, how to make them feel empowered, how to make them not reach burnout themselves, because having a chronic illness, having something that impacts you on a daily basis, like sensory processing disorder, where at the end of the day, you're so overwhelmed that you're in that state of fight and flight yourself. So trying to recognize that, look at what you invest every moment of every day to make their world better. What would 2% look like if you gave yourself 2% difference? What if you then increased it to 5%? It doesn't have to be these monumental shifts. They can be small micro moments that you build up over time, because as a caregiver, you will recognize the difference in your body, in your mind, in your health and well-being. And you'll also find a little bit of space for a passion, for a hobby, and giving yourself just a little bit back. Not saying you're not caring for your loved one, but giving yourself that time, scheduling it into the calendar so that you can have a non-negotiable. Because if it's not in the calendar, it's not happening. Because as you said, the unexpected happens when you're a caregiver. You thought the morning was free and you were going to the dentist, and then your loved one has a crash, and then, or a seizure, and you're on seizure mode. You've got medications going, you have to monitor them, make sure they're breathing, and all of those steps that are involved with being switched on in caregiver mode. And so then your plans change and you forget to reschedule that dentist appointment, because where is it just meant to fit? And so by doing it in small, manageable moments, you're giving yourself compassion. You're giving yourself grace. And I'd like to ask you about compassionate truth. And what's that mean? The sentence that you wish every caregiver heard before they hit that wall.
When I always think about compassion, how it goes hand in hand with like empathy, right? And caregivers have so much empathy. They feel what the person that they're caring for feels. They understand. And then the compassion comes. The action is the compassion. Like, how do I show this person? And I think having empathy for yourself, when that you are, sometimes we forget to self-reflect and realize, where are we in this process? How am I feeling right now? Like our personal check-ins that we need to have. Am I feeling okay? Am I about to fall apart in tears right now because I have nowhere else to go and I don't know what to do? I am so exhausted and sleep deprived. So if I thought about that as far as myself, then it'd be like, oh my gosh, I need to take care of me. And then the compassion comes in, right? Am I going to do to take care of myself in this moment? I am going to make myself a hot cup of tea and I am going to sit down for a minute and I am going to take some deep breaths. That's the 2%, right? Maybe the 2%. And then going beyond that, you're absolutely right, Michelle, putting something on the calendar and understanding the time you create for yourself is actually time that you're able to give back to the person that you love. So I think that's the way I would explain this compassionate truth. It goes hand in hand with empathy. We have empathy for others. We should also check in and see how we're feeling and extend that same compassion to ourselves.
You named it perfectly. So it's devotion and depletion, and they can exist in the same room. Can we talk about guilt for a moment? Why is it so common for caregivers to feel guilty for needing to take rest?
If we think about the concept of devotion versus depletion, your identity shifts essentially as we become a caregiver. So rather than being someone's adult child, you are now their caregiver. Rather than being someone's wife, you are now their caregiver. And becomes you have two choices. People are in this fight flight stage. They are just taking care of the person that they love. And so it becomes a matter of either total sacrifice or abandonment. So what do? We fall into the sacrifice bucket most of the time. And we devote ourselves completely. We do everything that we can. But with doing that, we are slowly depleting our cup. And what happens when we are basically going to starve, we are going to dehydrate because there is nothing left for us to have. So even though we are devoted to the one that we love, we have to constantly rethink. And I ask because I think when you're so involved with the caregiving process, we forget that we're not taking time for ourselves. And so this matter of depletion is occurring over time. And like you had said earlier, this caregiving journey is not a brief moment in time. This caregiving journey is generally for many years. And as a physician, I ask my caregivers, like, okay, where are you? Because I recognize that there are going to be periods where they are going to be completely depleted and they're going to need respite and care. And it would almost make sense that we don't run into these walls, rather find ways to replenish what the caregivers need so that they can sustain the caregiving journey successfully.
And I think that's really beautiful way of looking at a very sensitive topic when we're talking about depletion versus devotion, because we are giving all of ourselves to support, love, care. And I like to refer to it as like when you fill up your bucket, they talk about making sure that yours is full. I feel like for a lot of caregivers, it'll resonate that you keep having to dig deeper. That bucket is empty, but you have to find more from the bucket. And when you're trying to replenish it, you have to think about that I just took an extra 500 liters from below my bucket that I then have to slowly refill whilst it's still being taken from. So when we talk about taking time out for ourselves and committing to recovery from or prevention of burnout in that moment of exhaustion, it's okay, I'm giving myself 2%, but every day I'm having 190% taken away. So it's not something that's going to happen in an instant. It is going to take time, and you have to recognize that we've been taking from that bucket for so long that it's going to need patience and it's going to need understanding that we are doing something special for ourselves and it will make a difference over time. Compounding interest in yourself. So it's that analogy that if you're making a cup of tea and you do one squat every day, then you've done 365 squats in the year. So don't focus on the here and in this moment. You took 2% to have a cup of tea and sit down for 5 minutes. That, if you do that every single day, that adds up over time. And it's really important for us, both as carers in the medical field like yourself and as carers in the home, that we're able to be honest with ourselves and recognize that we've been taking for so long that giving back is going to just take a little bit longer, but we will get there. And that giving yourself grace and understanding is the first step to having self-compassion, having self-understanding, being okay to accept that I feel guilty for taking this time, but it's okay for me to take this time so I'm still here to do the support. And I want to have a look at a trauma-aware way to support caregivers who have experienced a history of medical trauma themselves from their own experiences, medical trauma from witnessing what their loved one has had to go through, being dismissed or not believed, being questioned or persecuted for the role in which they play. And so now is in constant activation mode, aware of anybody who they interact with, their nuances, the changes in their tone or their behavior that then have a knock-on effect to us feeling worse, especially after a medical appointment. What's a way that caregivers can address this and maybe reduce it?
I remember when my son had heterotaxy, it was a very rare congenital heart defect. And even I didn't learn about it in medical school. My husband is a physician. He didn't learn about it in medical school either. And I remember when we were trying to take care of him, people didn't know, the medical community, they didn't really know what to do with his situation. They couldn't help us. And yet they were trying to like direct us. And it was, I think, us being physicians, we were able to navigate things differently. But what I learned was I connected with a heterotaxy support group. And so many of these mothers had the same stories. Like, we were dismissed. I had to figure this out on my own. I had to advocate for myself this way. And when I was able to connect with these mothers, and I think I drew from their strength, and it helped me to speak up and say, no, this is what I've learned. And this is the experience. This is how we're going to help my son. And that was empowering. I know there are support groups for various different conditions, and there are just support groups for caregivers in general, but joining a support group so that you can be heard and you're not dismissed. I think that's a huge step for a caregiver. It helps validate their concerns. When you have other people having the same concerns, it helps to reassure them that they should not be dismissed. They should be heard. And I think it gives you this power, this force. I really am thankful for the support group that I joined. I still continue to communicate with the mothers who are now going through the same journey and give my perspective, my support, even though our son has since passed. It's been 10 years.
What's a trauma-aware way to support a caregiver who has a history of medical trauma either for themselves or witnessing medical trauma to the loved one, dismissal by a medical team or a support agency, or never being believed about what is happening in their lived experience with their loved one, and is now in constant activation mode where they're noticing nuance in tone and that's making them have additional stress or overwhelm? What would be a support to help them in that space?
When my son was ill and he was dying, and his disease was very rare, had a very rare congenital heart defect that even I hadn't learned about in medical school. And my husband had not learned about in medical school. So we learned from scratch what was going on. And it was very traumatic to watch this baby like have to give him morphine and have to give him medications that were sedating. So this child wasn't eating and was essentially like dying in front of us, but we were trying to help him not struggle through the process. And no one really knew about what was going on with him other than the people that I met through a heterotaxy support group, the other mothers that stood by my side. And we were worlds apart. I mean, there were moms from all over the country. They were able to tell me, like, nope, this is what needs to happen. This is who needs to see your son. This is what they need to do. And they helped me navigate a lot of disease processes. These have been going on for a long time. I think finding a support group is essential so that when we are dealing with the trauma, for instance, as far as dementia goes, people lose their loved one before they are gone. And experiencing that and slowly losing that relationship is so hard and traumatic. But being able to talk to someone else who's also experiencing that and living in that space is so meaningful. Because when you take your loved one to the doctor, what are they going to ask? Well, how are they? Are they eating? They're weighing them. They're checking their blood pressure. They're not talking to you about what are you dealing with day and night when your husband doesn't recognize you anymore, or your wife thinks you're a stranger in the home and you're just trying to take care of them and they think that you're trying to violate their personal space. I mean, those things can be so traumatic. And even now with our life, things that are going on, my husband and I often talk about it's so good to know that other people are in this space with us and can help us navigate the difficult times. I really, even as a physician, believe that the medical system is not set up to support our caregivers. I really believe that the medical system is failing our caregivers, and we need to create better systems to support them. And when I was in medical training, I would often tell the residents and the fellows, listen to what the caregiver is telling you. Listen to their gut instinct. They have the answers so that we can actually manage our patients' medical problems more effectively, and that way help our caregivers. Listen to their concerns. Listen to the behavioral things that are going on. Listen to the feeding issues that are going on. Once you sit down and listen, rather than just going through the check marks of what we learn in medicine, we can take better care of our patients and our caregivers.
And I think from the beautiful side of your journey with your son is that you've been able to make these lifelong connections with other parents who have been and know the experience that you've had. And that is really a challenge when it's something that's rare. They don't know what it's about. They don't know why it's happening. And that was something that was my journey with my eldest son, is that we had no idea. Nobody had seen it before. Nobody knew why it was happening. And so he, as they would say, had to be the test pilot for how we were to treat it, how we supported him in that journey. And when my second son came along and he had the same symptoms, he didn't have to go through the same level of medical intervention and medical trauma because we already had a pathway for how to manage, treat, and support them. And that's part of the journey, as well as that medical professionals, when they don't know what's going on and they're having to do more research. And that's when I find that you come up against the pushback of what the lived experience is, because they have not experienced, they don't know what it's like. And in my journey, they get it wrong. Mistakes get made. They can make decisions that impact them on such a significant level that we go backwards instead of forwards. And there's not that acknowledgement that I made a mistake.
Or I
Obviously, we don't know what we're doing. And I think that's really, there's like this, for medical professionals, there's this like, how dare you not know? You are the expert in this field. Why don't you know? And that may be something that they feel themselves or that is being interpreted from that space. But at the same time, I respect a medical professional who says, I don't know right now, but I will come back to you. I'll do my research, we'll work it out together. Please let me know what's happening and then I can do all these things, rather than it being, I know everything in this field and this doesn't apply here, and it being dismissed and ignored. And I think that's where the disconnect comes for caregivers, and why they do feel dismissed is that when they're reporting what the lived experience is, in the 24-hour cycle. And if that is ignored, when you're seeing a medical professional for 10 or 15 minutes, because that's generally the allocated portion of the time, that's really rough to have it not be seen or heard because they don't know what to do with it. And when caregivers hear those types of statements, or they can see that they haven't even written down what you've talked about, it's not being recognized, or there is notes that are made about caregiver was too happy when providing this report. Caregiver was too emotional. And so, like, rather than it being about the information or the overwhelm, it's about their emotional state. So you feel like you have to be hyper vigilant around your tone, your attitude, how you're presenting, if you're happy or sad, or being able to like put a mask on and hide everything so that you're not dismissed, so your loved one doesn't get dismissed in that process. And we've been talking a lot about protecting the caregiver, protecting the loved one. Can we look at when caregivers here protect your health? It can sound like another impossible task for them. So what's the simplest, most realistic way to approach this so it doesn't become an impossible task?
I think starting small is very important. I recently, when I've been working on this whole caregiving module with one of my patients who is a caregiver, and I take care of both this person and their partner. And I have to thank them that we have these meetings together to work on this because I want their perspective. I often tell him, you are giving me so much back. And we're hoping that this sort of 12-step module will help caregivers navigate from my perspective as a physician and from their perspective as a caregiver. So there are questions that I ask that maybe other medical professionals do not ask. And there are things that I say that maybe others don't say. Sometimes I cross boundaries. It is what it is. But when I'm talking to my patients, I tell them occasionally, I don't know what's going on. Sometimes they come in very rare symptoms, but we're going to find this out together. We are going to figure this out together. Or I don't know what is going on. Are you willing to travel if I can find the place that will help us discover what is going on? And I have sent people across the country for answers. And I have been involved virtually with discussions with when the person is there and the professional so we can try to understand what is going on. You're living this unknown, that adds an additional burden, that adds an additional stress. And I also tell my caregivers, are you afraid? Is there something that you are afraid of? I don't think other doctors ask that questions routinely. That's the next question. Are you tired? Tell me about that. Are you sleeping? No. Tell me about that. How are you sleeping? Are you taking your medications? Tell me about that so that it opens up the dialogue. And just a few days ago, someone said, you're going to think I'm crazy, but my gut says this. And I said, well, your gut is right because you know better. You actually know when your gut tells you something, there's a moment to pause. And I did come back as there's not a medical term for that. People would probably think I'm nuts, but if you're feeling something, we have to explore it and think about it. I think dismissing a caregiver is a big mistake on our part as medical professionals, and shame on us for doing that. And I think this was important. I never realized how hard it was to administer morphine and Ativan to someone who was dying and then watch them not eat, watch them disconnect. When I did that for my son, then I learned that just writing those prescriptions, it had more meaning than just the act of writing a prescription. I was essentially telling someone, you're going to be giving them a medication and they are going to breathe slower and they're going to sleep and they're not going to communicate with you and it's going to calm them down. But because your loved one is dying, and I thought, how important was it for me to feel that, for me to really internalize that so that I know what my caregiver is going through. So I think really shame on us as a medical system that we don't support our caregivers more.
I resonate with that situation where we have to have lived experience. We have to be able to know and understand what our loved one and our caregiver is having to go through. When my boys were little and we had no idea and we were having to do nasogastric tubes, we actually went through that experience as a parent so that we could understand the trauma, what it felt like, and that changed the whole way we address that. When a little one is a little bit older, when they're preemie and stuff, it's a little bit easier with the nasogastric tubes. But when they start getting to toddler age, the trauma from the process of wrapping them, people having to lie on them and hold them so that you could do it. I got to a point where I actually got certified in doing it because, no offense to the nurses, they took too long. It created this cycle of trauma and fear and the yelling of "Mummy, save me" at the top of their voice, and people walking past and popping their heads in because a child was screaming
Being
for someone
tortured.
to save them. Yeah. And so I used to teach the nurses when I'd go in because there's no way to do it on your own. But we found a way to make it faster, to make it so that they weren't afraid. It was the same when we changed from a nasogastric tube to a Mickey button. And even then, replacing those, I got certified in that too, because in nursing, you may experience them, or in being a medical physician, but you don't do it day in and day out. Whereas caregivers, when they get ripped out, you have to step up. You don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you're capable of until you have to step into that role. But if I hadn't lived it, if I hadn't understood the pain of granulations, what happens when a nasogastric tube, how much you feel it in the back of your throat, all of those elements, how can I be compassionate and understanding of why my child is so afraid, why they don't want it, why we keep pulling it out? Without that lived knowledge, that's part of it. Like watching someone, as you were saying, being administered morphine to manage the pain and to drift off and them stop communicating and them stop eating. I have been on that journey with some of our loved ones as well. And it's scary. There is no going around or sugarcoating how that feels when you're watching that deterioration and they're trying to make them comfortable. And because in our brain, we are for preserving life, our main role is to do no harm. And it's the same, I know, in medicine as well. So it's hard to be in that space. And I really appreciate how honest and raw you've been to share your journey as being a caregiver. And then what impact that has had on you as a physician and the way you have changed your approach to caregivers, to the journey between the two, patient, caregiver, the medical professional, the medical professional and the patient. That to me is revolutionary in the space that we currently experience. And I want us to just switch slightly before we close. I'd love some tiny tools that fit into real caregiving life in the car, as you're crying on the bathroom floor, in a waiting room or a kitchen. Can you share some micro tools that caregivers can use in like 1 to 3 minutes to interrupt that stress physiology in the moment?
Well, let's start with this. So some of the tools that I talk to my caregivers about is creating sort of like your role and your mission statement. And we worked through that together. What is your mission statement as a caregiver? And what is your role and your mission to this job as a caregiver, not just to the loved one, but to yourself too. And really thinking about that, we have a family mission statement that we have in the front of the home when we come in, and a parenting coach helped me with that. And I'm so thankful to her for that. But I adapted it because I thought we need to have a mission statement. What is our mission statement? And in I think our darkest time when we're feeling overwhelmed is, believe me, I have found myself in a grocery store sitting on the floor and crying and not being able to stop. And people looking at me like I'm a crazy person. But you know what? I'm not. I was tired and I was overwhelmed. And I was losing a child at that time. And that was just that. And coming back and sort of, okay, I'm feeling this right now. I'm on this mission. What is my mission? And I can move through this. Or reminding yourself, it's okay not to be okay. Take a few breaths, get up and just sit with the feelings that you're having. Let your emotions guide you sometimes. That has to be okay. But as far as before we get into that breakdown mode, I think there are ways to decrease breakdowns and to decrease the extent to what a breakdown would look like. And this is where I was trying to create these modules where, okay, let's try to gain perspective. Let's think about what our caregiving obstacles are. And I sit down with my caregivers. We draw them out. Let's think about how do we cope with overwhelming emotions. Like, let's try to have these strategies in place, because if I can tell you right now, as a caregiver, you are going to have this feeling. And what are we going to do to prepare for that feeling when it comes? Because if you're prepared, it's going to be a lot more manageable. Reminding yourself, okay, what is your role? What is your mission? I have a patient who is navigating the cognitive decline process with their partner, and we have very specific goals. And every time, the first thing that we do, what are your goals? Why are we here? So we review them every single time I see them. And then creating a personalized self-care plan. Like you had said, if it's not on the calendar, it's not going to get done. And that will help sustain us. It will help us, like a hobby. Maybe this hobby can only be enjoyed once a month, but it will be enjoyed once a month. It will be on that schedule. Communication skills with other care professionals, communication skills with the loved one and the caregiver. So we talk about those challenges and how can we prepare for those conflicts and navigating family conflict. And I talk about navigating the healthcare system. We talk about this. You are not going to be dismissed. They are going to come at you like you're going to be dismissed. They may think that you're telling them what to do, but you're the caregiver. You're the one in control here. And having the conversation that if someone steps into your space and has no idea what you're dealing with, then we may need to find another provider that's going to support you. And enhancing time management skills, that's really important. Our caregiver role changes as the person we are caring for changes. Like you had said with the nasogastric tube, babies tolerate things a lot differently than a toddler does, and a lot differently than a tween does, and a lot differently than a teenager and an adult and an elder. So helping understanding our role and how those transitions are going to change our caregiving responsibilities, our caregiving mission, our caregiving role, and our personal needs. So I try to work with my caregivers around those aspects of caregiving to hopefully help minimize the trauma and minimize the difficult times, and minimize those raw emotions in a way that can be disturbing, but allow people to have emotions and appreciate them as they come with the caregiving process. I also remind my caregivers to think about what they are doing in this journey and how it takes such a special person to step into that caregiving role and to sort of pat themselves in the back. They are doing an incredible job, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the way we envision. It's not going to be ever in that way, but to sort of celebrate the good days, the good minutes, the good moments, rather than focus on their failures.
I think that message there of the good things, the silver linings, that even in our worst, darkest moments, there's still light that filters through. And they could be as simple as someone smiling at you because it's been a really hard day, but being able to recognize that there is still moments of joy. There's still moments where we can feel calm. There's still moments where we have access to kindness from a stranger. We have access to kindness to others in those moments. And by holding on to those and creating a gratitude journal, keeping those memories, a gratitude jar, and being able to go and sit and read them when the day is overwhelming and really difficult helps us to be able to keep that momentum going. And I really appreciate you putting words to all of those moments where we can invest in micro things to make our days better. And if you could leave caregivers with one message that is both medically true and deeply kind, what would it be?
Repeated this multiple times through our conversation. I would let caregivers know that caregiving is not easy. They have many challenges personally and in their caregiving role. And to be kind to themselves, to have compassion for themselves, extend the same compassion and kindness and love that they give to the person they're caring for, to themselves, or some of that at least.
Really value that. And caregivers, when you're listening to this, just take a moment and absorb that message. Dr. G has provided us with a range of amazing moments today. And Dr. G, where can listeners find your work and your book?
The book can be found anywhere that books are sold online, and hopefully the audiobook will be out if someone just wants to listen as they're caregiving. But the book is called Life, Love, and the In-Between, a geriatrician's journey through aging and the meaning of life. And I have these lessons that my patients taught me that have helped me through the journey of caregiving for my son. And these lessons are about transparency and empathy and compassion and relevance. So the book can be found, again, anywhere. You could type my name in and book, it will be found, or look on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, bookshop, anywhere. And on my website, GeriAcademy.com, it's GERI Academy.com. It is a completely free blog for individuals who are aging, for caregivers. It has information on diseases specific to aging and a lot of reflection. And there is a shortage of geriatricians. And I wanted to make sure that blog post was available to people so that they can get that information and use it and advocate for themselves, take it back to their doctor and say, okay, I have learned this, I have learned that. So there's no advertisement on the blog. It is all just free information from experts on aging related topics. And there are some caregiving topics on there as well.
Thank you very much for providing that free service for people to access when maybe they don't have access to a geriatrician in their local area, or even if they do and they just want to find knowledge so that they can come equipped to an appointment. I'll make sure that I include all of your links in the show notes of our episode. And as you were talking about your mission statement, I'll also include a link to a free mission statement and a lesson for anyone listening to create their mission statement so they can come back to that why when things are really tough. Dr. G, thank you. This was such a steady conversation, the kind that helps caregivers exhale a little bit because it names what's real without shaming them for it. Today, we've talked about what caregiving actually looks like behind closed doors, the sleep deprivation, the mental load, the strained relationships, the quiet guilt, and the deep love all living in the same day. We also named something I wish every caregiver was told early. Chronic stress in caregiving is physiological. It's not a character flaw. And we explored what happens when caregiver reserves erode over time and how it can be rebuilt intentionally with small, realistic supports that fit inside real life. If you're listening and you feel like you're not coping, I want you to hear this clearly. Your body is responding to demand. You're not weak, you're not broken, and you are likely depleted. And depletion is a signal, not a sentence. So you don't have to solve the whole future today. You just need the next right step, a sip of water, a 2-minute downshift, a small ask for help, a boundary, or one gentle decision that brings you back to yourself, because your needs are part of the care plan too. To everyone listening, thank you for spending time with us. You don't have to hold it all alone. I'm Michelle, and this is Radiant Moments Caregiver Oasis. Until next time, take gentle care of your radiant moments and of yourself.
Thank you, Michelle.